What if everything you were told about how society has to work is wrong? What if the sickening feeling you have every time you pay taxes, get a parking ticket, or watch riot police push back a crowd? What if that heavy-handed order is not civilization at all, but just the most normalized form of control humanity has ever invented? That's the question at the heart of this video. And when a person sits with it long enough, it stops feeling like a philosophical question and starts feeling like a deeply uncomfortable personal dilemma. Because here's what no one in school ever said out loud. You were born into a system you never agreed to. You said the Pledge of Allegiance and sang the Star-Spangled Banner as a form of patriotic indoctrination. Today we are reviewing the most remarkable philosophers in history who said, there is another way. Part 1. The world nobody talks about. Most people walk through life with a quiet, burning feeling that something is wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not apocalyptically wrong, just slightly and consistently off. Like the rules were written by someone who wasn't thinking about them. The job that grinds the soul down. The healthcare system that bankrupts a family for getting sick, the landlord who raises rent because he can, the politician who promises change and then disappears into the machinery of the same institutions he swore to dismantle. That feeling is not anxiety and it is not weakness. According to a growing number of political philosophers, psychologists and historians, that feeling is clarity. And what this video explores is a profound, often misunderstood idea that has quietly survived centuries of ridicule, repression and reinvention. Non-violent anarchy, not the chaos, not the Molotov cocktails, not the burning dumpsters the media loves to show, the real thing, the extraordinary, eye-opening and, for many people, life-changing philosophy that says human beings are capable of organising their lives without rulers, without coercion and without violence. When we talk about modern non-violent anarchy, or anarcho-pacifism, we are talking about the ultimate expression of peace. It starts with this realisation. The state is essentially organised violence. Every law, every tax and every decree is backed by the threat of force. If you don't comply, men with weapons eventually show up at your door. This is the jolting reality of our existence. The problem is that for centuries, people thought the answer to an oppressive government was a violent revolution. But if you use violence to seize the throne, you've already poisoned the well. You've just replaced one group of people with a monopoly on violence with another. It's a sickening cycle that is repeated throughout history, leading to the same dark, terrifying authoritarian ends. Non-violent anarchy suggests a different path. It posits that the means must be consistent with the ends. If you want a society of peace, you cannot use a bloodbath to get there. This is what philosophers call prefiguration, which is living the future you want right now. It is the idea that peace is the road, not just a destination at the end of a war. We are taking a deep dive that most people will never take. By the end of this video, the world will look a bit different. Part 2. The problem in the story you were sold. There's a story most people grew up believing. The story goes like this. Without a government, without police, without centralized authority, human beings would tear each other apart. It would be like Lord of the Flies. We need the government the way we need gravity. It's the invisible force holding everything together. Thomas Hobbes said life without a sovereign ruler would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. That line has been quoted for 400 years to justify every concentration of power humanity has ever seen. But here's the eye-opening part. That story has a few stunning, embarrassing holes in it. The same state that supposedly protects people from violence has been, throughout history, the single greatest source of violence in human civilization. Wars, colonization, slavery, mass incarceration, police brutality are all state-sanctioned, all legal, all organized. Peter Kropotkin, one of the most important anarchist philosophers, looked at that history and wrote something that still feels relevant today. He argued that mutual aid, voluntary cooperation between people, is not some utopian fantasy. It is, in fact, the engine of human survival throughout evolution. People help each other. Communities form not because a government told them to, but because human beings are wired for connection and cooperation. So, the question becomes, if that's true, if people are naturally capable of mutual care, why does nearly everyone assume they can't govern themselves? Part 3. What non-violent anarchy actually is. The word anarchy scares people, that is by design. The word comes from the Greek anarchia, meaning without rulers, not without rules. Without rulers, the distinction matters enormously and most people never hear it. Modern non-violent anarchy is the political philosophy that says all hierarchical structures, including the state, capitalism and any coercive authority, can and should be dismantled. But the stunning and often overlooked part is the method. It should be done peacefully, not coercively. It should be done without replacing one oppressive system with another. Political philosopher Frantz Fanon argued that violence was a necessary catharsis for the colonized. And there is pain in that truth, but look at the results of violent revolution. The French Revolution gave us Napoleon, the Russian Revolution gave us Stalin. The cycle of violence doesn't end. It just takes a brief vacation before returning with a new face. The philosopher and activist Emma Goldman, who spent her life articulating this vision of non-violent anarchy, put it beautifully. The most violent element in society is ignorance. Violence, she argued, doesn't end oppression. It just transfers it to the person holding the whip. Because if the means are violent, the end will be too. This is one of the most profound ideas in political philosophy. It simply means this: you cannot build a peaceful world through war. You cannot build a free society through tyranny. The road is the destination. Peace is not the goal at the end of the revolution. Peace is the revolution itself. This is the consistency of means and ends, and it is impressive in its logical clarity. Part 4, the numbers nobody brings up. Here's where modern non-violent anarchy gets genuinely remarkable and where the data does something most people never expect data to do. The data sides with the idealists. Researchers Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan conducted one of the most comprehensive studies ever done on political resistance movements. Their findings were, frankly, staggering. Non-violent resistance campaigns were nearly twice as likely to succeed, a 53% success rate, compared to violent ones, a 26% success rate. Let that sink in for a moment. The peaceful movements won more than twice as often. Not because the world is soft, not because the opponents were weak, but because non-violence is, structurally, a more powerful strategy. It lowers the barrier to participation. It invites the grandmother, the teenager, the disabled veteran, and the shopkeeper to participate in a strike, a boycott, or a protest. The movement becomes massive, and massive movements are far harder to suppress, and the effects are more durable. Countries that transitioned through non-violent campaigns were found to be 10 times more likely to become stable democracies within 5 years, 10 times. This is because the habits that build non-violent movements such as consensus, negotiation, and shared decision-making are the exact same habits that sustain democracy. The movement is already practicing the society it wants to create. Part 5. Real people, real places right now. Now, a reasonable person watching this video might push back. Okay, this sounds wonderful in theory, but does it actually work? Is there anywhere on Earth where people are living by these principles? And the answer is an astonishing yes. In southern Mexico since 1994, the Zapatista communities in Chiapas have governed themselves through rotating councils called Juntas de Buen Gobierno, or Good Government Councils. No permanent leaders, no police force in the traditional sense. They maintain a defensive perimeter. The goal isn't to turn the other cheek until you are dead. The goal is to resist without becoming the very monster you fight. The Zapatistas built their own schools and their own healthcare systems, and after an initial 12-day armed uprising, they shifted almost entirely to civil resistance and community construction. A community that should have been crushed by the Mexican military is still there, still autonomous, still educating its children on its own terms, over 30 years later. In northern Syria, the region of Rojava emerged from the horror of civil war, not as another authoritarian state, but as a living experiment in democratic confederalism, which is a philosophy inspired by political philosopher Murray Bookchin. Governance flows from the bottom up, beginning with local street communes. Women hold co-leadership roles at every single level of governance. Their internal justice system is built on restorative justice, mediation and community reconciliation rather than prisons and punishment. They have a defense force to protect against ISIS, a group so brutal they defy comprehension. But the structure of that defense is horizontal. And in Copenhagen, Denmark, a neighborhood called Freetown Christiania has been self-governing since 1971. About 1,000 residents manage their own rules through common meetings, run collective businesses, maintain their own recycling systems, and have preserved this way of life for more than 50 years inside one of the most conventional democracies in the world. Plus, in Ex-ZAD, Zone A Défendre, in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, France, what began as a protest camp to stop a multi-billion-dollar airport project evolved into a permanent autonomous zone. After the airport project was cancelled in 2018, the residents stayed. They manage a sprawling territory of farms, bakeries and workshops without state interference. They are famous for their intergalactic solidarity and their ability to repel police evictions through mass, non-violent mobilization. These are not fairy tales. These are real, breathing, functioning communities that prove something extraordinary. Human beings, given the freedom to organise themselves, often do it remarkably well. Part 6. The hard, honest objections. Now let's stop for a second and address the elephant in the room. Let's have a serious conversation that doesn't ignore the genuine criticisms. And there are real ones. An uncomfortable challenge to anarchy is scalability. Consensus decision-making works beautifully in a village. It becomes genuinely slow and difficult at the scale of a city and arguably paralytic at the scale of a nation. The Occupy movement, for all its energy, collapsed partly under the weight of its own leaderless structure. A movement that cannot coordinate itself, cannot sustain itself. If you've ever tried to decide where to go for dinner with a group of 10 friends, then you know the struggle. And then there is the risk of co-optation, which is the dangerous, demoralizing reality that radical movements often get absorbed by the very systems they oppose. A little policy change here, a symbolic concession there, and suddenly the revolutionary energy dwindles. The movement settles for reform instead of transformation. And what about the free rider problem? What about the person who just wants to sit on the couch and let everyone else do the work? In a hierarchical state, that person is called a politician. In an anarchist community, they are called out. Social pressure isn't enforced by a law, but by the glaring reality of the community's needs. If you don't contribute to the harvest, you don't eat. If you don't participate in the neighbourhood council, you don't have a say in where the new well is built. It's not punishment, it's consequence, it's reality. These are not small problems, they are the honest, burning edge of this entire conversation, and they are why this philosophy demands not just belief, but sustained daily commitment from everyone who practices it. Part 7. But what about the killers and the invaders? This is usually the part where people get the most skeptical. Who stops the murderers? Who stops the tanks? Anarchist societies don't just leave the doors unlocked and hope for the best. They replace professional, unaccountable police forces with popular militias. These are voluntary, rotating units made up of community members. Because the roles rotate and the members are immediately recallable, you don't end up with a separate warrior class that feels entitled to bully everyone else. When it comes to justice, the focus shifts from punishment to restoration. If someone causes harm, the goal is 100% restitution, repairing the damage done to the victim. They use popular tribunals, often with randomly selected community members to arbitrate. For the truly dangerous, the rare, violent predators who refuse to change, the final resort isn't a cage, but social ostracism or banishment. It sounds harsh, but it's a way to protect the community without becoming the very monsters they despise. This means the predators no longer have access to the communal food stores, the medical clinics, the housing, or the protection of the local militia. It is a profoundly heavy consequence. In a society built on cooperation, being voted off the island makes survival incredibly difficult. The containment here isn't a physical wall, but a social one. For external defense, they rely on decentralized resistance and federated communes. History shows that a motivated, decentralized population using guerrilla tactics can be an absolute nightmare for a standing army. During the Spanish Civil War, the anarchist columns proved that you could have a fighting force where officers were elected and decisions were discussed democratically. In the modern age, we have tools like distributed manufacturing and encrypted communications that make decentralized defense even more viable. It's about total resistance, where every member of the community is invested in protecting their freedom. Part 8. Everyday anarchism that is already happening. But here is something that almost nobody talks about. Anarchist principles are already operating all around most people quietly, without any label attached. During the COVID-19 pandemic, mutual aid networks appeared in cities across the world almost overnight. Neighbours organised food deliveries for the elderly. Community members pooled resources for families that lost income. Groups like Food Not Bombs were providing meals in communities long before any government agency arrived with a clipboard. During Hurricane Sandy, while FEMA was still holding meetings, community-based networks like Common Ground organised relief, providing food and housing through mutual aid networks, with a speed and efficiency that left official disaster response looking sluggish and bureaucratic. These were not states. These were not corporations. These were people using direct action and voluntary cooperation, solving urgent human problems because they had to and because they could. This is what Kropotkin meant by mutual aid. This is what Goldman meant by freedom. It is not somewhere in the distant future. It is the extraordinary underreported fabric of how communities actually survive a crisis. The state shows up after, the people show up first. Part 9. Why this matters to real life. So why should any of this matter to the average person sitting with their phone navigating their daily life? We are exhausted from the 8 to 5. The last thing we want to do is go to another meeting. We want to order DoorDash, turn on Netflix and disappear. This is a profound challenge. Anarchism asks you to be present. It asks you to manage the bakery, serve on the rotating militia, sit on the community tribunal and mediate the dispute between your neighbour and the person down the street. It asks you to be conscious, fully awake and fully responsible. In addition, the philosophy of non-violent anarchy is not really about governments and revolutions. At its core, it is about something deeply personal, which is the question of how much authority over one's own life a person is willing to surrender, and to whom. Every time someone joins a workers' cooperative, instead of working for a corporation that takes the surplus of their labour, they are practicing anarchist economics. Every time a community organises a neighbourhood garden, a mutual aid network, a free repair cafe, a democratic workplace, they are building prefigurative politics. They are living the future in the present. They are proving in small and stunning ways that human beings do not need rulers to function, to thrive, or to care for one another. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote that the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. That is not a call to violence. It is a call to consciousness. It's a call to deliberate, meaningful, and courageous living. Part 10. The Path Forward. Modern non-violent anarchy will not end the government tomorrow. It will not dismantle capitalism by Tuesday. Its greatest challenge, and this is the uncomfortable truth, is that it operates slowly in a world that is suffering urgently. The people crushed by poverty right now cannot always wait for a gradual cultural transformation. Where that tension is real and it deserves to be honoured. But what this anarchist philosophy does, and what it has always done, is something quietly phenomenal. It keeps alive the most radical and perhaps the most human idea in the history of political thought, that freedom is not something a government grants, it is something people practice, together right now in the choices they make every single day about how to treat one another. The world feels terrifying and overwhelming right now for a lot of people. The systems feel immovable. The problems feel incomprehensible. But somewhere in Chiapas, a community is voting by consensus on how to run its school. Somewhere in Copenhagen, 1,000 neighbours are holding a meeting about their shared future. Somewhere nearby, people are feeding other people, not because they were ordered to, but because that is what human beings, left to their best instincts, actually do. It is a call to join or start a Food Not Bombs chapter, feeding people without asking for a grant. It is a call to support a worker-owned cooperative instead of a corporate giant. It is a call to resolve a conflict in your family through conversation and restoration, rather than cold silence and resentment. That is the profound, heart-stopping and entirely real promise of modern, non-violent anarchy. Not chaos, not destruction, just people, finally, trusting each other enough to be free and asking the question, what can we build together?